In it here now, what are you gonna do now? I'm gonna been on here now, who bid $500,000 bid.
Welcome to the Legacy of Agriculture. This program will explore the past, present, and future of agriculture. We'll look at the people, products, and events that have formed its history. And now with today's guest, your host, Chris Bair.
Good morning, everybody. This is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. We appreciate you joining us this busy Saturday morning here in South Dakota. Today, my guest is Dwight Hofland from Pifer's Land Management. We've had Dwight on a number of times on the show talking about all of the intricacies of land management. And this week, we're going to go more in depth about land management and what a landowner and a tenant can expect from a land management team. So Dwight, before we get going, first of all, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. I know you're busy.
Well, I think the challenge comes with the technology. How's that sound? So
well, we spent 20 minutes here trying to figure out why we were getting echo, and finally we just switched computers, right?
Yeah.
So, folks, if you're just joining us and are not familiar with the Legacy of Agriculture, we're now up on YouTube. We're on Apple and Spotify. So if you missed this morning's radio show, you can go to Apple, Spotify, or YouTube and go into the search button, and you'll find any show that you want to listen to. So, Dwight, let's do this. A lot of people don't understand real estate terminology. And define for us what a tenant is, what a land manager is. And of course, we know what a landowner is, but tell us what a land manager is defined as and what a tenant is defined as.
You know, I guess the simplest thing that a lot of people know what a property manager is that manages apartment complex and a VRBO and those type of things. And so look at it, land managers and management as that type of industry where we are managing land for property owners who are either absentee landowners, second or third generation, a trust company, a trust itself, investment firms, and so forth. And so that's exactly what we're doing. And so to hinge off of that, Chris, and you mentioned a tenant, and a tenant is just like any other tenant, except this tenant would be a farmer, right? And they're going to be the ones that are going to come in and farm the land. And if you were in a property management, your tenant is a person who rents your apartment or your house or anything like that, except here we're just talking about agricultural land.
So what is an absentee landowner? Define an absentee landowner for the listeners.
Well, if you drive around the country, and you if you have Onyx is a perfect instance for people that don't know what that is. It's a hunting app, and they go on there. You drive by a field and you click on it and you say, "Oh, that person's owned." I'm in South Dakota and it's owned by Chris Bair. Okay. He might not live right next to that piece of land. He might live 100 miles away, but so he's not really living there. He's absent. He means he lives someplace else. Okay. So when we talk about absentee landowners, specifically, when we talk about second and third generations, mom and dad have now passed on. The land has been given to the children, and probably most, if not all of them, do not live around the land. They've lived someplace else. So let's just take a piece in North Dakota, let's just say, or South Dakota, and the kids live in Chicago or New York or the West Coast or Arizona. And so they don't come home very often, if at all. And when they do, they coming and looking at the land is really not their priority, right? They get together with family and those things. And so they're far removed from the agricultural world, and so that's where they get us involved, and we keep them informed of what's going on, where things are, with a tenant and the ag industry and so forth.
So a landowner doesn't necessarily somebody who's living there on the land. It can be a landowner can be alive. They can be living in a different town. They could be working a full-time job and have absolutely nothing to do with the farmland. Or a landowner can be simply a trust where somebody has passed away. The land is in a trust. It's going to stay in that trust. And the land manager has been hired by the trust to manage and take care of that land. Is that right, Dwight?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And the trusts are set up for multiple reasons, as you know, and not to go too far into the weeds with that part of it, but trusts are developed for different reasons, right? They're for families. It could be for tax purposes and how they, how it's set up. A legacy trust, so it goes on forever in perpetuity. So there's all kinds of reasons for those types of things. But anyway, that trust hires us. We're the liaisons between them and the tenants.
So what is the main reason, or why would I as a landowner want to hire a land manager?
Well, I think for the most part, people look to us is because, just as we talked about, they're absentee, right? They're
Yes.
not, they hear what goes on in the news, they read in the papers, but they're not here. They don't see the day-to-day activities and the things that's going on in our rural areas. We are, right? If it isn't our managers, we work, as you know, Chris, very closely with the real estate and the machinery people. We're very well connected. We know what's going on in those communities and in the country. That's our purpose, right? Our purpose is to inform them, and because we're boots on the ground, right? And so we're right in the thick of it. We live and breathe it every day. Our guys get up in the morning, and that's what they do all day long. And so we're that conduit.
How many acres does Pifer's manage right now throughout the upper tier of the United States?
Yeah, we're right around that 240,000. And that's a vast, it's a breakdown of many different things. We manage, of course, the common is the crop land, right? But we do a lot of pasture. We have land that's rented and for specialty crops. We have hunting. We manage some hunting rights, both in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Missouri. So we have some stuff going on there. Not a lot in South Dakota, not a lot in North Dakota, Montana. We do some stuff out there. Those are where the basic footprint is of Pifer's.
You brought up an interesting point that I want to talk about going into our second segment. You talked about managing hunting land, managing crop land, managing pasture land. We've got irrigated land, and all of this is agricultural related. So when we come back from our break here in just a few minutes into segment number 2, I want to talk about the different types of management that goes into managing those different types of properties. But right now we're coming down to the end of our first segment. We want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Pifer Auction and Realty, for being so gracious in sponsoring the Legacy of Agriculture on the radio show. If you missed the radio show, you can listen to us on Apple and Spotify and now YouTube. Just log into YouTube under Legacy of Agriculture, and you can pick the show that you would like to listen to that is archived. We appreciate the good people at Pifer's, and absolutely nobody does it better than Pifer's.
This is Kyle, equipment sales representative with Pifer's Auction and Realty. Pifer's is proud to provide the best seller experience around. From start to finish, our trained equipment representatives will make sure the right decisions are made to get the most money from your new or used equipment. We believe that knowledge is power, and our reps provide you with the current market estimates to help better understand machinery values. If you want to sell machinery, then nobody does it better.
Good morning, everybody. This is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. Thank you for joining us on this Saturday morning. We're broadcasting through technology on our computers today, and I appreciate Dwight Hofland from Pifer Land Management for joining us. We had some good conversation in our first segment about land management. Now, I want to remind everybody that when we're talking about land, oftentimes land is coined as farmland, and this can be irrigated farmland. It could be non-irrigated. It could be pasture land. It could be hunting ground. It could be straight up pasture. It can be all different types of agricultural land. But as we dive a little bit deeper into those different types of farmland, Dwight, let's talk about irrigated, what it takes to manage irrigated farm ground versus non-irrigated farm ground.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So irrigated crop ground, of course, has its challenges like any other parcel of land. It's just that you have a few more moving parcels, right? Or pieces to the puzzle. So, we have all kinds of different type of irrigation systems in the country, from flood irrigation to the old wheel irrigation system, center pivots, and pivots and irrigation system have come more and more, just like everything else, has become more and more technically driven, if you want to put it that way. We have irrigation systems that and to me, this was kind of a new one. It was, I thought it was kind of unique, and I think it still is unique, as we have a pontoon that we push out in the river, anchor it with cables to the shore, and we siphon the water out of the river. And so with that pontoon and the current, we got to anchor that, and then it comes up through a big pump and underground, and then shoots it out to the pivots out into the field. Quite a unique system. But the common ones, of course, are still the center pivots. You get out along rivers and some of those irrigation channels. There's flood irrigation. We have those people that they call them a gate master. Those are the people that are hired by the local water districts who drive the irrigation channels, and you call them up and say, I want to put on 1.5 inches of water today on my ground. They go and they have it metered, and they open the gate and they flood the field, right? When that volume of water is done, they shut it, and we proceed on. And so there's just lots of different, I would say, nuances to that program, to all the programs. When you have irrigation, there's, you got to monitor it. The new technology, it's all on the phone. They can turn them on and stop them. They know exactly how much water is being metered out. And so that's a huge time saver for a lot of these farmers that use irrigation. And of course, as like anything else that's government regulated, so we all have to fill out irrigation reports at the end of the year, as far as volume of water, and that's all got to be submitted to the states that does that. And so, but along with the water usage, there's the maintenance thing, right? And who's responsible for those maintenances? So whether it's an irrigation of a pivot system, a flood system, the old wheel irrigation sprinkler head, so those, we talk about that a lot amongst our managers, who's responsible for what. And if I was going to categorize it, say, and I would say 95% of our leases, the tenant, if the owner owns the irrigation system on a pivot system now, if the owner owns a pivot, the tenant's liable for all the repairs above the ground. Okay. If it's the well, everything below the ground is still the owner's responsibility.
So when you're managing a piece of irrigated ground that's got a center pivot on it, all of that maintenance can be negotiated in or out of the contract. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yep. And
Okay.
it's a preference of the owner, and then we work that out between us and the tenant, and try to find an amicable way of those costs.
Being raised and growing up on an irrigated farm and then moving out here into the Midwest and being on regular farm ground where irrigation isn't even talked about, it's a totally different process. And unless you really know and understand irrigation can be very, very intense. As a matter of fact, that's the most difficult part of the summer for any teenage kid, is knowing that he's going to be on an irrigated farm all summer. And my dad, I'll never forget. We had hand lines, solid set, and wheel lines. And when center pivots became advanced enough, he switched all that over to center pivots. And we thought, we got it made all summer long. Now we don't have to move pipe, we don't have to move wheel lines or check plugged rain birds or any of that goes along with irrigation. And then we got center pivots. And if you've ever changed a tire or a gearbox or a motor on a center pivot in the middle of a potato field in mid-July, you'll understand that it's not free and it's not easy. And so, having said all of that, I think that's one of the reasons why land management is so vitally important to an absentee landowner. That gentleman, that gal could have a job in Omaha, Nebraska, or Des Moines, Iowa, and they've got a section of farm ground that's got 4 center pivots on it, and they don't have the ability or the time or the means to maintain that pivot on their farm ground to a tenant. And therefore, that's where the land manager steps in, is to negotiate all that out so that everybody is on the same page. Is that right, Dwight?
Yep, exactly. And that's all part of our contracts when we sit down with our tenants.
Who's responsible for making the irrigation reports at the end of the year to both to the state and federal level when that's required?
Yep. We work with the tenant. The tenants are kind of, we put it back on them, but we make sure they're filed completely, and all the forms are complete, and then get submitted, and we keep records of all of that.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. I bet it's fun to manage hunting ground.
I have to say, I don't manage a lot of it. Our guy, Ben Tilburg, who works for us, he's in our Wisconsin office, does a lot of that. And he probably does 90% of the stuff that the Pifers does for hunting. But it's it's one of those niches that's not very well utilized. And we found a niche. We find that in some of those states that hunting is really a passion. The Dakotas, there's a lot of free hunting. You get in some of these other states, it's not so free, or it's hard to get on. And so we can come and rent out the crop ground and come in behind and rent out the hunting rights where there's trees and I want to call, they're not wasteland, but it's land that's not a high producing. And these guys that are big into hunting, there's some extra value added income for the tenant or for the owner. And these tenants are just pleased as ever that they have an opportunity to come in and rent that land. And so liability wise and all of those things are all taken care of from our office here. And it's been very successful that way.
I want to talk just a little bit more about managing hunting ground when we come back into our third segment. I think it's a worthy piece to talk about. We're coming down to the end of our second segment, folks. Here, I'm Chris Bair, your host of the Legacy of Agriculture. A shout out to Pifer Auction Realty for sponsoring the Legacy of Agriculture. For a complete listing of all of the auctions that we've got coming in the spring and summer of 2024, both real estate and equipment, go to pifers.com. That's PIFERS.com. Or you can call us directly at our office at 605-836-2277. There's a beautiful listing of both machinery and real estate auctions on our website with drone footage and pictures and complete information. This is Chris Bair with the Legacy of Agriculture. We'll be right back.
Hey, this is Jasmine with Pifer's Auction and Realty. Did you know that Pifer's has a construction consignment auction? That's right. We are currently accepting consignments to be sold on May 29th, starting at 9 a.m. If you have items that you would like to sell, call 605-836-2277 today. When it comes to auctions, go to Pifer's. Nobody does it better.
Hey folks, this is Chris Bair, your host of the Legacies of Agriculture. I'm back into our third segment with Dwight Hofland with Pifer Land Management. He's the manager for the entire company, managing over 240,000 acres across the upper tier of the United States. That's a big undertaking, Dwight.
It is it's been a very rewarding process. I think back, I've been to the company a little over 13 years now, and it was pretty small when we started. We've grown exponentially in acreage and staff. We have a great group of people that are helping me manage, or helping Pifer's manage, not me, but Pifer's manage these acres, and they're all doing an excellent job doing that. And they got a passion for it. Every day you get here, these guys, a lot of them start at 6 o'clock in the morning and they're here till 6 o'clock at night, because that's what we do, right? We have a passion for agriculture, and we know what needs to get done during our day.
At Pifer's, we don't sleep. We just work night and day, right?
Yeah, well, just about.
So in our second segment, I want to ask you a couple of more questions about hunting land, Dwight. You said something that was really interesting. You said as you get out into the more rural areas and the unpopulated areas, occasionally you can find hunting land that you can hunt on for free. But you said that as you get closer to the metropolitan areas, or I gathered that as you get closer to the metropolitan areas, if you have a chunk of land that's big enough to hunt on, that gets pretty expensive, doesn't it? What does that cost?
To hunt, if we're just talking about the hunting fees, it's, the stuff that we're renting out for hunting, or the rights to hunt, it can vary. We've seen it at, $15, and we've seen as high as $40, and it all depends on what they're hunting for, and it depends on the region we're in. The demand in certain areas is much higher. And once these guys get onto it, they make it their own, right? They're looking to, okay, hey, if I go in there and can I plant a food plot, or can I dig out a little area for some ponds so I have some water, so if the deer coming passing through there, or the turkeys or whatever, it's a stop off place. There's an art to that. And so sometimes these hunters are actually giving us some educational stuff on what works and what doesn't. Now, Ben out in Wisconsin, he knows all tricks of the trade. He's worked with a lot of those guys. They've helped each other. They've been really good to work with. We get down into Iowa and Missouri. We got some families down there. They go in, they interseed crops inside the crops. So they fly on the cover crops. And so once the harvest is over, the cover crops have come up. So it's perfect for deer. They work with the tenants on some of that stuff, and it's worked out really, really well. And it's big into the deer hunting. We get in Western North Dakota, South Dakota, where the pheasants are big. We have a lot of that too.
Very interesting. So when it comes to managing pasture ground and pasture land, I would imagine the biggest challenge is who takes care of the fences, who takes care of the water wells, who takes care of the manless windmills or the water coming in. Tell us how you manage your way through fence maintenance, water maintenance, who manages the water, where does the water come from, etc.
Sure. That's an interesting question, because it's all over the board. It really is. It's not a one size fits all when it comes to pasture. Let's just talk about fences to start with. We have some owners who say, I don't want, there may be an elderly and they need the fixed income. So they say, and you know what, I'll take a few dollars less an acre, but the tenant's going to maintain the fences, right? And they're going to pay for all materials. We have some owners who say, hey, you know what, let the tenant pay for the certain amount, and after that, we'll split the costs, right? And so, that's kind of how most of them are, because fencing gets expensive. And time is of the essence anymore. People who are big into cattle and spend a lot of time, or are ranchers. There's ongoing maintenance stuff, but new fences and those kind of things. A lot of them are being now subbed out, so they hire a company to come in and tear out the old, build in the new. And that's getting to be more and more popular. So that gets reflected a little bit in the rents because the owner's got to absorb some of that when those costs. And as you know, fencing materials and new fencing, tearing out the old fence, bringing in new fence gets to be really, really expensive. And so that's a huge investment for the owners. And so sometimes we find them some money, right? There's lots of money out there by whether private or public. Equip, that's through the local FSA, NRCS. There's some cost sharing on some of that stuff, both for water and fences. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife or your state game and fish departments sometimes have extra funding to help pay for some of those costs, both in water and fences. Not so much perimeter, but mostly like if you're into cell grazing, it's amazing how much private funding is for some of that stuff. You just got to know where to go look for it.
So it looks like to me, I know that when I came to work for Pifer's years ago, one of the things I looked at land management, I thought, that's got to be the easiest thing in the world, because all I got to do is find the guy that wants to hire me to be a land manager. I negotiate a price. I gather the check from the tenant. I deposit that check into a trust account, and I write a check out to the landowner, and then I go fly out to Florida and sit on the beach for a week, or for the summer per se. And that's really not the way that it is. Land management is a very, very detailed. You have to be very conscious of the needs of every one of your landowners, because every piece of land is going to be unique. Whether if it's hunting land, what can you hunt? What can you hunt with? How do you manage those hunters? When it comes to irrigation, it's managing those center pivots. It's managing the well. Is the pump pumping the amount of water that it should be pumping, and is the tenant getting what they're bartering for as well? It comes down to the reports at the end of the year. It's filing taxes. There's a lot that goes into land management that people just don't understand. And so having a good land manager that's detail oriented and conscious of both the tenant and of the landowner is very, very essential, in my opinion. As we come down to the end of the third segment, again, thank you, Dwight, for joining us. We're going to be back here in just a few minutes. Our sponsor, Pifer Auction and Realty, will be back in just a few minutes. Nobody, absolutely nobody, does it better than Pifer's.
This is Kyle, equipment sales representative with Pifer's Auction and Realty. Pifer's is proud to provide the best seller experience around. From start to finish, our trained equipment representatives will make sure the right decisions are made to get the most money from your new or used equipment. We believe that knowledge is power, and our reps provide you with the current market estimates to help better understand machinery values. If you want to sell machinery, then nobody does it better.
We're back in the fourth and final segment of the Legacy of Agriculture. We appreciate everybody for joining us on WNX Radio out of Yankton, South Dakota. And also, if you don't get to hear us on the radio show, you can join us on Apple, Spotify, or now YouTube. You can join us on any of those apps to listen to our previous shows and get caught up on current events and stories and what's going on in agriculture. My friend and teammate Dwight Hofland from Pifer Land Management is here with us, and we've had three really great segments talking about land management and the intricacies of land management and the different types of farmland that there is to manage. But I want to ask you a couple of questions, Dwight. Let's say that I'm a tenant and I'm renting a section of ground, and you're the land manager, and I'm going down through the field and I've got a 60-foot planter, and everybody knows how miserable or how tough it is to manage a 60-foot planter, or I've got a 50-foot head on my combine, And let's say that there is a utility easement across the property with either a cell tower or a power line or a power pole or a fence line or a well or something, and I hit that as a tenant. What's the land manager's responsibility in the event of a personal property or somebody else's property getting damaged on a piece of farmland?
Okay. Well, first of all, let's talk about who's insuring what. Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to go down that road, and let's just say, whether it's we have a utility easement or a water line easement or whatever like that. A lot of those states have, if it's a water, they probably, or a gas line, they got some markers out there or some pedestals, so that everybody knows where those things are. One of the things we make sure of is that, hey, everybody knows where those things are, right? It's pretty hard to miss a power line pole sticking up in the middle of a field, but it does happen. Somebody hooks it. It's kind of tough on machinery. Very rare do we ever hear where somebody hits it hard enough to maybe knock the pole down or something like that. That's pretty rare. But the liability falls on the farmer, the operator. We all carry insurance. Pifer's carries insurance. The landowner carries liability insurance, and so does the tenant. The tenants are also name us and the owner as additional insurer. In today's world of throw a mud on the wall and see what sticks and who can I sue. So unfortunately, we have that. And so we just make sure as a land management company that all those pieces are in place. So if something like we have a catastrophe or something like that happens, that we're all protected. It's not uncommon for somebody to hook an irrigator, a center pivot, or something like that, and roll a tower. And again, it goes back to the tenant. Okay, and we make sure as a manager that those replacements and things get fixed, that they're fixed as good or better than they were before. And so if that means, hey, we got to buy a new wing for the center pivot, that's what our insurance is for. And that's why we're so adamant about everybody carrying insurance for those particular purposes.
So the land manager, when you sign the contract with the tenant and the tenant and the landowner both sign that contract, land manager's job is to also make sure that all of the insurances are in place, that there's adequate insurance, that it covers any type of liability, and making sure there's enough insurance and even secondary insurance in some cases to make sure that everybody's covered in the event of an accident, especially if somebody gets hurt, right?
Right. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good question and a good comment. I mean, it's a very standard couple paragraphs within our contract about what the amount is that they have to carry. Most of them are more than that because farmers are getting bigger and bigger, and so the amount of insurance they carry is larger. And within our contract, as if everybody signs, the tenant, he names who the insurance company is, the insurance agent, and their contact information. We connect with them. They send us a deck sheet proving that those requirements are met.
So if in the event that somebody, I'll take the position of the tenant and a life-changing, let's say we have a 3-year plan put in place or a 3-year contract put in place with the landowner and with Pifer Land Management. And I, as the tenant, farm it for 1 year, and I have a life-changing event where I can't farm it for the next 2 years. Are those contracts transferable, or do they become null and void? How do those work, Dwight?
We work with our tenants if something like that happens, right? And so, life happens, and we all know that, whether it's health issues or family issues, divorces and those kind of things. And so we work with our tenants, we're not going to hold anybody's feet to the fire on that because life happens. And so when we circle back with those guys and they saying they got these issues, first thing we do is we talk to our owners and saying, hey, Chris has got an issue and got some life-changing things. Are you okay to let him out of the contract? The first words out of the owners is probably yes. Secondly is, are we going to be able to rent it for equal amount or more? And, so those are analysis that we got to do. I don't really like the idea of saying, well, if we rent it for less, he's going to be held liable for the difference. We already have a life-changing event. We don't need to add fuel to the fire. So we try to find a balance. That's where the counseling comes in, if you want to put it that way. We always say we're about 40% managers, 60% percent counselors, and we do. We spend hours and hours doing those things, and so that's reality.
One thing that I want to say is we're coming down to the end of our fourth segment, and we've just got a couple of minutes left here, Dwight, is that oftentimes land management seems like you guys do such a good professional job. It looks easy. And when you can make something look easy, that means you're probably doing a great job, right? But land management is not easy. As I've listened to conversations and you and I and Tim Peters, who covers the South Dakota area and the western Nebraska or western Iowa and northern Nebraska areas, it's by far from easy. It's very complicated, and there's a lot of moving parts that go into land management. And Kevin Pifer said it best on one of his shows. A quarter of land now can be worth $1 million, $1.5 million. And you're not only are you managing the land itself, but you're trying to protect the value of that land so that it increases in value for that landowner. That's part of your responsibility as a land manager, but it's very, very complicated. But Dwight, I'm sure that there's listeners that's going to have a lot of questions. How can they get a hold of you? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. Chris, the best way is, to call Pifer's number directly and ask to speak with the land manager. They can call your office in Sioux Falls, and you connect us up with myself or Tim Peters out of the Sioux Falls office. But that would be the best. Or you can just call me direct on my cell number, 701-630-4359, or dhofland@pifers.com.
Folks, thank you for joining us on the Legacy of Agriculture. We'll see you next week.
We hope you've enjoyed today's edition of the Legacy of Agriculture with Chris Bair, sponsored by Pifer's Auction, Realty, and Land Management. Call Pifer's at 605-836-2277.